This is Homeschool 101, a collaboration between ABS Television and the Ministry of Education. Stay attentive and attempt all activities. And now, today's lesson.
Hello, and welcome to our first Mathematics Homeschool 101 lesson. I am your teacher, Mrs. Hughes, Thornhill. I am so glad that you were able to join us here today for this first mathematics lesson. Math is all around us, and we use it daily, whether consciously or not. There seems to be this negative energy that surrounds math, but hopefully through these homeschooling lessons, we will be able to change the negatives into positives. Yes, the aim here is to prepare our CSEC students for the upcoming exams, but we do not want to leave anyone out. And so these sessions will hopefully also appeal to a wider audience, showing how mathematics is applicable and relevant in the real world. Here you have a glimpse of the examination structure, and these are all of the content areas that will be covered in the paper one. So the number you see next to the topic are the number of problems that would appear in your upcoming exam. This is based on the CSEC syllabus, all right? So for number theory and computation, you can expect to have 6 questions, consumer arithmetic, 8 questions, sets, 6 questions, measurement, 8 questions, statistics, 6 questions, algebra, 6 questions, relations, functions and graphs, 8 questions, geometry and trigonometry, 8 questions, vectors and matrices, 4 questions. You may notice that it looks a little bit different from probably the former structure, and this is because, of course, everything is condensed into one. And so we do have to prepare. Even though it's a multiple choice paper, you cannot neglect any of these topics.
You're watching Homeschool 101.
So some important things to note in preparation for your upcoming exam is that there's absolutely no use of calculators, and you must be sure to use your time wisely. You have 60 multiple choice questions, and you're only allotted 90 minutes, which is an average of about 1.5 minutes per question, or if you prefer, 90 seconds per question. Granted that you have 1.5 minutes per question, I want you to take note that, of course, the questions have different difficulty levels, and so where you may need the entire 1.5 minutes for a particular question, there are some questions that would take you significantly less time. Next, we have our test-taking tips, and you should read questions carefully at least twice. Make sure you understand what is being asked in order to select the most appropriate answer. Be careful to shade in the correct space. You may decide to come back to a question or two for whatever reason. So it's absolutely important to make sure that you match the appropriate question to your corresponding answer. Write answers on your question paper to guide the review process. It is also recommended that you do any necessary side work on your question paper. Do not make any unnecessary markings on your answer sheet. And this is absolutely important. There's a difference between your question paper and the answer sheet. The answer sheet looks something similar to the photo you see on the side here, and it's called a scantron. So you want to make sure that you shade the bubble completely, or if in the event you make an error, that you erase completely. Answer all questions. I cannot stress this anymore. It says it all right there. Answer all questions. Why is this important? One question carries a lot of weight. So you miss one, you lose out on an opportunity to even have a 25% chance of selecting the correct answer. The reason why you have a 25% chance of selecting the right answer is because, of course, you only have 4 options. So do not leave any questions unanswered. Now we're going to take a look into strategies for answering questions. And as we go through these strategies, I will also present particular questions that we will use as examples, and we'll go through them together. So strategy number 1 says work the problem before you look at the given options. Question 1. The number 32,747 written to 4 significant figures is, and remember we're looking at the question first, we're coming up with our answer before actually answering. So in order to answer such a question, you'd have to first know what are significant figures. Significant figures, when we look at significant figures, we start counting from the first non-zero digit. So if we look at our number, 32,747, with our knowledge of what significant figures are, just to recap, we start counting from the first non-zero digit. In this case, from left to right. Our first digit is 3, so the 3 would be our first significant figure. Our second significant figure would be 2. Our third significant figure, 7. Our fourth significant figure, 4. But if we notice, there's a 7 that follows that 4. And so how significant figures work, if I cut this number off here, a 0 can fill this space, but because this number is a 7, the 4 is going to increase by 1. So 1 more than 4 is 5. So we can assume or guess. We now know that our answer is going to be 32,750. All right, so if we look at our options, we've already found our answer, and that is B, 32,750. With that same strategy, here's another example. The next term in the sequence, 1, 5, 11, 19, 29. When we have sequence problems like these, we want to find a pattern. And so there's some sort of connection from one number to the next, okay? So if we look at 1 and 5, the difference between 1 and 5 is 4. 5 and 11, 6. So in this case, we added 4. 5 to 11, we added 6. 11 to 19, added 8. 19 to 29, we added 10. And so from following this pattern, that means we're going to add another 2. And if we add 2 to the 10, that means we get to 12. So we would be adding 12. 29 plus 12 is going to give us 41. And if we look at our options, our answer is right there. B is the answer. Strategy number 2 says that we need to read all the options before choosing our answer. Some options may look very similar, so make sure to read through every alternative, even if you think the first or the second choice is the correct one. Here's our question. The value of 0.274 times 0.08 is, and our options are 0.002192, and we can keep reading them. We'll notice that they all have 2192, 2192, 2192, 2192. So we don't actually have to work out the multiplication in order to get this answer. So in a case like this, what is the best practice is to count the number of places after the decimal point, okay? So here we have 1 place, 2, 3 places, and then we have 1 place and a second place. 3 plus 2 is 5. And how we tackle a question like this is that we understand that the point on any whole number is at the end. So if we write our number 2192, we can imagine our point right there at the end. We've counted 5 places, and that means we can move our point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places. That's where our point is now, and this place is just filled with a 0. So our answer is 0.02192. Another question under the same strategy. If 3.9 times 0.24 is equal to 0.936, then 0.39 times 240 is equal to what? If you look at these two parts of the question, the first part, the second part. We'll call this part A, part B. All right? So before the equal sign, we have 3.9 times 0.24. We can make a connection here with that first part and part B. Notice the same digits are there, they're just in a different place. And so one way, because in math you'll learn that there's more than one way to tackle a question. One way to approach this question would be to manipulate the point in the question and allow it to match part B so that we can find our answer for part B without actually going through any calculations. So here for 3.9, in order for it to look like 0.39, that means we'd move our point one place left. And for 0.24 to look like 240, we would have to move our point 1, 2, a third place to the right. So if we follow that same pattern in our answer for part A, we should be able to come up with our answer for part B. So I'm just going to rewrite our answer for part A, which is 0.936. And we're going to move our point in the same way that we would have manipulated the points here. So we take the point one place left. That's a good color. And then we were supposed to take the point 3 places right. So if the point is here now, and we move it 1, 2, 3 places, our point is now between the 3 and the 6. So our answer is 93.6. And you can see your answer there on the screen, which is C. Another strategy is to try to eliminate the answers you know are incorrect. Our first question there, question 5. 7 over 100 is equal to, and we take a look at our options, and the first thing that stands out is that they're all percentages. So that means we have a fraction, and they want to know what that fraction is equal to as a percentage. Now, by way of elimination, because we know that the denominator is a representation of the whole thing to be divided, and the numerator is a part of that whole, we have here options that we can already take out, just because if we look here, these are the first two options, A and B, are already less than 1%. So that wouldn't be accurate. So we can take those out. Another option can actually be eliminated, because if we have 7 out of 100, can it possibly be 70%? 70% is way too big. So we can take that out. And look at that. The answer is right there, clear. 7%. Another thing that's worth pointing out is that our option B here, 0.07. Another reason that could have been eliminated is because the 0.07 is the decimal representation of the fraction. And the fact that a percent sign is at the end makes that option invalid. So that's that. Question 6, using the same strategy of elimination. The square root of 200 lies between, and we'll look at our options here. In order for us to move forward, I'm just going to make a note here with the definition of a square root, because square root seems to give a lot of trouble to persons. They don't necessarily understand it very easily. So the simplest way to put it is that square root is the opposite of square. So if you know what a square is, then the opposite of square is square root. And I'll just insert, square is when you double a number. So an example of a square would be 4 times 4. So 4 times 4 is equal to 16. And so therefore, the square root of 16 is 4. I'll just reread the question. The square root of 200 lies between, and if we take a look at our options, we can already eliminate a few of them. So we have to select an option here that best suits the question. So which means these numbers, if we square 12, we get 144, okay? 144 is kind of far from 200. So let's just try another one. What if we said 15? The square of 15 is 225. That's somewhere in the ballpark. But 225 is greater than 200. So that means we can eliminate option C as well. And I'll go ahead and even say that we can most likely eliminate option B because 20, if we square 20, 20 times 20 is 400. That's just way off. So we can go ahead and eliminate B and eliminate C. The reason why C again was eliminated is because 15 times 15 is 225, and that's greater than 200. And notice it's attached to 16. So we already know that that's going to go far. So the only option left is D, which is 14 and 15. The other strategy is to make estimates for your answers and see if they are reasonable. For example, if you're asked to answer 50 times 9 is equal to some number, you would expect that that number, the answer, is a number close to 500 because when we have 50 and 9, 9, if we round that to the nearest tens, is 10, and 50 times 10, 500. So we know that if when we work out the problem, we end up with something like 5,000, that's just way off, okay? So question 7, Sharon got 80% on a test. If the total marks of the test was 60, how many marks out of 60 did she actually get? On the test, Sharon scored 80%, and it's a total mark of 60. So the question here is, what did Sharon get out of 60 to get 80%? We're going to take a look at our options. And this particular question is a good example of where some of our strategies overlap or work hand in hand, okay? So we can also even go through a process of elimination here. Now remember, we are estimating, oops, I have to go to the pen. Remember, we are estimating, and so we're not going to be looking for exact here for this particular question. All right, so let's think about this in the best way possible. Now, we can all come up with 50% of some number. 50% is just half of that number. So if she scored 60, or the test was scored out of 60, half of 60 is 30. So 50% is equal to 30 marks. So we can kind of use this as a gauge to eliminate some of our answers. Now, one thing already can come off of there, and that's 24, because 24 is less than 30. We can already go and eliminate another answer, and that is because if we look at 60, if the test was out of 60 and she scored 60, that would not have been 80%, that would have been 100%, and so we can take out 60. So we're left with 36 and 48. Going back to our 50%, we can even go further and eliminate another one, because if we make a relation between 50% and 80%, 80% is actually closer to 100% than it is 50%. And so, by way of elimination and estimation, we can guess that the answer is C, which is 48. Our next strategy is to ensure your answer fits the question. For each problem, make sure you answer the question asked. For example, if there are two variables, let's call them X and Y, are they asking you to find X or are they asking you to find Y? Now I know X and Y in math, letters period in math, confuses a lot of people. So we'll look at our question and kind of forget about X and Y for now.
You're watching Homeschool 101.
question 8 says there are 40 students in a class. Boys make up 75% of the class. 40% of the boys have a pet dog. How many boys in the class have a pet dog? So we'll notice here that a question like this, what they really want us to answer in this case is how many boys in the class have a pet dog. But from reading the question, we'll notice that we actually have to do something else before getting to the answer. There are 40 students in a class. The boys make up 75% of the class, and 40% of that 75 have a pet dog. How many boys in the class have a pet dog? Okay, so we're just going to make an association here between the 40 and the 75%, because what we need to do is to find what is 75% of 40. Now, 75% kind of reminds me of money because, well, then I think 75 cents. And because percentage is out of 100, that would be a representation of the dollar. Now, how can we break up this 75 cents into 3 quarters? So if we are saying that of the whole, 75% of them are boys, let's find that 75%. The whole is 40, and we just said that 75% is a representation of a quarter. Quarter, what does that sound like? Quarter. 1/4, right? So that means I can divide my 40 by 4. 4 into 40 gives us 10. All right? So that means that 25% is 10, and that's 10 boys. How many more 25s do we need to make up 75? We need 2 more. So if we add another 25 and add another 25, we get our 75%, and each of these 25s is 10. And that means 75% is 30. So we have 30 boys in the entire class. 30 boys in a class of 40 students. That's the first part of the question. Now that we know how many boys we have, we need to find 40% of that. Now, 40%, because remember you can't use calculator, it may not be that simple to think about, but we can always break our percentages into 10%, and 10% is always the easiest percentage to find. So if we move our point, which we know our whole number, we have our point at the end. That's our point there. If we find 10% of 30, that means we move the point 1 place to the left. So 10% of 30 is 3. Since 10% of 30 is 3, then that means, since we're trying to find 40%, 10 times 4 is going to give us 40. So that means we can also multiply our 3 by 4 to find 40%. And that gives us 12 boys. And there's our answer in A. Okay? Our next question says that if 240 is shared in the ratio 1 to 2 to 5, the difference between the largest share and the smallest share is. And we have our options there, so we can go ahead and take a look at those. But we're going to now dissect the question and make sure that we understand what is really being asked. So we have a whole, which is 240. I'll leave it blue. And it is divided into 3 parts, 1, 2, and 5. Okay? So here, the question wants us to find the difference between the largest share and the smallest share. Remember in primary school when you learn these terms, so when you see difference, you know that you subtract. So we know we're going to have to subtract at some point. So if our whole is $240 and we need to share it amongst these 3 people, somebody gets 1 share, somebody gets 2 shares, and somebody gets 5 shares. That means this is also a representation of the whole because the entire $240 is what's being shared. So I can go ahead and add 1, 2, and 5. 1 plus 2 plus 5 gives us 8. So that means the whole to be shared, 240, can be divided by 8, and we will get $30. So this $30 here, don't mistake, is 1 share. Okay? Now that we have 1 share, we can find any of the other parts. So we can find 2 parts or we can find 5 parts. But let's not waste time and find every single part. They only wanted the difference between the smallest and the largest, or vice versa, the largest and the smallest. Okay? So how are we going to find the largest share? Now that we have 1 share, we can find 2 or 5. So the largest share is simply one part times the shares. So $30 times 5. And if we even just ignore that, I don't know if y'all are seeing that. If you even just ignore the 0, 3 times 5 is 15, and you can add a 0. That's $150. Not forgetting that you're asked to find the difference. So difference again means subtract. So we're going to subtract our $30 from our $150. $150 minus 30, and that's equal to 120. Okay? Our final strategy is the guess and check strategy. And with this, you want to be able to use the options or answers given to guess and check by substitution. Substitution just simply means to replace, okay? So our final question, if 3n is an odd number, which of the following is an odd number? And these are our options. So based on the strategy that we're going to be using, we are going to just substitute. 3n is an odd number. Let's just choose an odd number. An odd number, I'm going to pick 5. So if 3n is 5, then 5 plus 2 is equal to 7. Likewise, if 3n is 5, 5 plus 1 is equal to 6. 5 minus 3 is equal to 2. And 5 minus 1 is equal to 4. And based on the question, they wanted to know which of these options was also odd, and the only odd number there is A, which we got 7, and that's 3n plus 2. Okay? So that's the end of our strategies, but just some general reminders. If your answer does not match any of the choices, read the question again. Recopy the numbers and try solving it one more time. You want to also remember the second point there. What if 2 given alternatives seem correct? Take your time and just follow through. Apply what you have studied and learned. And of course, we would not have been having a math lesson if we didn't have a few practice questions. And so I want you to take time to record these practice questions and keep the strategies in mind when working them out. Remember that you cannot use calculators on such questions, particularly because we're preparing for CSEC. And Just take your time to go through them, all right? So please join me next week for another episode of Homeschool 101, where we'll go over this week's practice questions and take a look at consumer arithmetic. Thank you and goodbye.
You've been watching Homeschool 101, a partnership between ABS Television and the Ministry of Education. Thank you for viewing this lesson. Join us again next time.